little bit and see what lessons learned there are, things that we can do at PAG to help support you in the process more fully, but also just key points or takeaways that we could share with ADOT in terms of things that are going really well that we want to keep doing, and then things that perhaps we could navigate different ways to support more fully in future grant cycles. So we're going to take some time to look at those pieces, but to be fair to everyone that's on the call, for those that did not necessarily apply for funding this cycle, I just wanted to kind of just reiterate some key points that I think will be helpful for the future grant cycle, but also allowing us to be fruitful in the way that we shape future meetings for the next 2 years until the next grant cycle opens. So if you attended the 5310 grant cycle scoring criteria training that we held, you might remember a variety of pieces that were pertinent. And so some of the things that we're going to kind of champion over the next 2 years are going to be in direct alignment with that particular scoring criteria to set everyone up for success for the next grant cycle. And so with that, one of the things that you might remember is that across the board, regardless of the project, there was a heavy emphasis on making sure that the project request was in alignment with our coordinated plan. So as we look over the next 2 years and working together to advance coordination in the region, we want to be able to have a very fruitful discussion about what might be some of those proposed projects in the future, not only so that they could be reflected in our coordinated plan, but also so that we can incorporate the insight and the knowledge around what is the ultimate goal of those projects, to make sure that they're reflected accurately in our coordinated plan in terms of these are the things that within our region with regard to the mobility coordination group that we're actively championing together. So I want to make sure that we take some time over the course of the meetings, in the meetings that are scheduled in the future to really take a look at those pieces. One of the other things you might remember is there are aspects that are looked at in the scoring criteria to see if your proposed project is filling a regional or service gap. And so some of those things are going to tie well into some of the next topics in our agenda, which is the agency profile data and the service area boundary maps, whereas they're kind of a nice nexus in some of those future projects with some of the things that we'll be looking at when we do the agency profile data and of course the boundary maps. Another thing that you might have remembered in that training is making sure that our fleets are maintained in a state of good repair. And then also if you were going to be applying for any type of maintenance funding or preventive maintenance funding, or even just a replacement vehicle, just really having a strong sense of what the cost to maintain a vehicle is, and the associated financial impact of that, so you can be prepared and also be prepared to have some discernment around what type of funds would be appropriate for you to be applying for. So whatever tools that you might be currently using to be successful in really monitoring your costs will be helpful for future grant cycles. But also if that's something that's kind of a struggle for you currently, and you'd like some support around that, that would be something we would want to incorporate in future meetings, is how can we help all agencies be successful in really understanding their costs to maintain vehicles so that they have an accurate picture moving forward, especially when they lean into applying for funding in future grant cycles. Another element was expanding to new service areas or just expanding services in general. And again, that's going to tie well into some of our other topics. So I'm going to kind of hit a pause on that particular aspect. Some of the other pieces was opportunities to open transportation services to the general public. And obviously with that, in accordance with ADA and being able to offer ADA trips. And then of course, just an overall awareness, especially for operating funds, the ability for your approach to be scalable, but also sustainable long-term. So those are the pieces that also tie back to really making sure that you understand your costs of transportation so that you can be scalable and sustainable, but also you can speak to it well in your grant application if you were to choose to apply for that type of funding. So the next part in the scoring criteria, you might recall, was just attendance around these coordination meetings that we're holding right now and those that will be held in the future. You might remember that the kind of the minimum threshold, if you will, is 75% attendance in those coordination meetings. Given the nature of last year, meaning 2020, due to COVID-19, obviously there's been some allowances, some significant grace across all agencies because of the impact and just even the nature of how we had to conduct meetings. So I will share that with you as we are leaning into the time we'll be scoring applications, just so that everyone knows that there isn't an acknowledgement around that. But as we hopefully recover from COVID-19 and return to perhaps a 2019 type of model at some point, it is something to be very cognizant of, is that there is in the current scoring criteria, the acknowledgement that kind of the minimum threshold is that 75% of attendance. But there's also a heavy emphasis on the degree to which you're active in coordination meetings, meaning what is kind of the fruit that comes from the seeds that we plant when we actually hold these meetings, and what are we actually doing as a group or as an individual entity to advance coordination in the region, and making sure that whatever those pieces are, whether it be sharing technology, sharing a tool, a best practice, offering training, using a particular type of equipment that you might have with other agencies, offering a training room, and the list goes on, that not only are you sharing your openness or your willingness to coordinate with others, but also making sure that myself as the mobility manager is aware of that and can kind of document that, so make sure that in future grant cycles, there is that acknowledgement that the mobility manager is aware of the efforts that you're making to advance coordination in the region. So just want to kind of make sure that all the great work that you're doing in our region gets rightfully noted and celebrated and acknowledged, especially as we lean into other grant cycles. So just kind of keep some mindfulness around that. The other pieces is just, you'll know that obviously fulfilling your contractual obligations and your Exhibit A scope requirements are always of that most importance, in submitting timely quarterly reports. The one thing that I would ask with regard to quarterly reports, or anything fleet related for that matter, if you're sending something to ADOT, to make sure that I'm copied on it. So this way, if there's something that I can be monitoring or making sure that it gets acknowledged, I would be able to help and support in that way. But also for tracking purposes for future grant cycles, it helps me to know with confidence that an agency is actually fulfilling their obligations, but also submitting their quarterly reports on time. So for those of you that do submit quarterly reports, I'm pretty confident most of you do a great job with that, but just as new people enter your organization, or you kind of pass the baton to other people to take on different levels of work within your organization, just a helpful reminder on that, so that we can stay diligent in those pieces. So that's just kind of the high level view of things that were really at the forefront of the scoring criteria, but I think translate well to things that we want to focus on in future meetings, but also just helpful reminders for you as you look ahead into the next 2 years of what you might be applying for, or what you might want to kind of champion, not only within your own organization, but as a effort to coordinate within the region. So with that, I know Centran has some exciting projects that they have applied for funding. So the next meeting that we will hold will hopefully be after preliminary awards are announced. So depending on how that works out, I might ask Centran to come back and speak as a presenter and kind of share a little bit of some of the things that they are working on within the region. So kind of stay tuned for that, and I'm excited to see how that might unfold. So just kind of planting a seed there. And if you haven't heard about some of the great work that they're doing with some of their mobility on demand type services, I would encourage you to reach out to them and kind of carve out some time to learn more about that as well. So the service area boundary maps is the next thing I'm going to just touch on lightly, and then the same with the agency profile data. and then the rest of and of course the vehicle inventory and fleet management. And then I'm going to save the rest of the time to just kind of get that feedback from you with regard to what things could we do differently, or what things should stay the same with regard to preparing for the next grant cycle. So for the service area boundary maps, for those of you, this might be the first time attending on this meeting, and therefore you hadn't heard about the service area boundary maps. That's something that we are championing in our region, to actually connect with all of the agencies and create a digital representation or a digital map of the service area that each organization fulfills, so that we can embed that into a website, so that it becomes very user-friendly to those that are seeking to better understand where there are service opportunities for elderly and disabled populations across our region, whether they are open to the public or more client-based type services. So I'm going to be connecting with each of you to kind of carve those pieces out. So kind of stay tuned for that. But I'm going to plant a seed here that as we look to the future for the next grant cycle, if you have a vision for your service area to perhaps expand, please remind me of that when we actually map out your current service area boundary, so that perhaps we could lean into what does it also look like if it were to expand, so that we could kind of document that as well, and perhaps showcase that on our digital map as some of the great work that's happening in our region, and good things to come in the future. So I'll share that with you. The agency profile data is a survey that I will be disseminating out next week. I want to allow the cure period to come to a close for those that applied for funding this year or this grant cycle, and before I deployed that particular survey. I know each agency I met with one-on-one, and we kind of walked through those questions. So most of those questions will not or should not be a surprise to you, because we walked through all of them. But you kind of already have a lens of how much time it might take to answer those questions, and kind of the scope of the intent behind those questions. But for those that were not on that particular call, we can carve out some time to go through it together. But just as a quick overview, the goal of it is to really better understand all of the different types of programs that are serving in both rural and urbanized areas, and of course kind of dig deeper on some of the specific programs that are serving some at-risk populations, but really start to delineate between a trip purpose and a trip destination, but also getting a better understanding of how agencies are being successful with some of their fleet management practices, and even starting to lean in on some of the ways that trips are scheduled, so that we can kind of identify where there's some opportunities to offer a new layer of support to agencies in our region that are serving both elderly and disabled populations. So those are the pieces that you will be seeing coming really quickly as that cure period, like I mentioned, closes this Friday at 4 p.m. The next part is the vehicle inventory and fleet management. And for those that apply for funding this cycle, you had to submit a vehicle inventory list in your application. So hopefully that list is still fresh and available to you. If you have not already sent it to me, I would ask that you send it to me, because that is something I need to pull together and include in our coordinated plan as soon as possible. And there's a lot of agencies and a lot of vehicles, so I need as much time as I can to kind of pull all those pieces together. The other piece is I would like to kind of have a better sense of the different formats that people in different agencies are using to compile their vehicle inventory lists, to see if there is an opportunity for us to not only make it easier for you to kind of compile that data, but also to work with ADOT in the future on how do we make it easier for you to kind of upload it, if you will, into the grant application. So a good place to start is kind of understanding where we are today, and what are the different methodologies that people are currently using in our region, and then how could that potentially translate into e-grants, and start navigating that over the next couple years. So I'd like to kind of take a look at that on your behalf. And then just, of course, a friendly reminder about quarterly reports that I mentioned earlier. And then, of course, if you're doing any kind of equipment service, so you should get from EQS a reminder that you need an inspection, etc. When those inspections are completed, if you could send me a friendly reminder that that has been completed, this way I can make sure that I'm aware of that. And this way, if there was kind of a question from ADOT as to where you stand on something, I could navigate that accordingly and support you in that way. So just a friendly reminder on anything that's fleet maintenance related or service related. If you're communicating ADOT about those pieces, if you could just copy me, that would be greatly appreciated.
Hey, Genine.
Hey, Lindsay.
Hi, do you mind if I jump in? Unfortunately, I got called into another meeting, so I wanted to make sure I say hi to the group.
Sure.
Okay, great, thanks. So, hi, everybody. As you all know, the application is now in the cure process. So you all should have received a letter from us detailing the items that you need to cure or fix by this Friday at 4 p.m. If you have any questions about those items, do reach out. What we're seeing now is that folks have satisfied all the items and then are reaching out to us to say they're done. But be sure you follow the instructions in your cure letter to resubmit. So don't leave your application in modifications required in eGrants. Make sure you actually go through and resubmit. That way you don't miss the deadline on Friday. So that's the main thing you want to focus on now. What will happen after that is we will then start distributing the applications that were successfully cured to your regional mobility manager and their scoring panel. And then we at the state level will start the review and scoring process as well. We aren't able to give you much advice on your application at this point. So we can't necessarily look through and give you the green light. I can kind of give you a generic statement saying it looks like your items have been satisfied. Thank you. If you're ready to submit, go ahead. So I hope that doesn't sound terse when I do that. But if you do want another set of eyes on your application before you submit, it's always nice to call your mobility manager because they've got a lot more freedom. So I know Genine has all the time on her hands in the whole wide world, sarcastically. But if you do need an extra set of eyes in a more detailed way, please do reach out to Genine. But if you've got technical questions about your cure items, just reach out to me. There are several agencies on the call today who have received released liens for their vehicles that are no longer in useful life and are ready for disposition. Just keep in mind that we do need to know the details of the sale once the sale happens. I need to know how much and when it was sold so that we can get it off of Fleet Focus, which sends you those inspection letters every year. Speaking of Fleet Focus, the EQS team has gotten significantly better at keeping up their records. So we're seeing a lot fewer agencies get reminded about the same vehicle, even though it just got inspected. But do keep sending those to us if that happens. Sometimes people have been getting notices for vehicles that have long been off the fleet. So keep sending those to us and we'll keep troubleshooting. We're getting better and better with working with the Fleet Focus team and EQS. So I can't stay on for the duration of the call, but I wanted to at least say hi to you guys. Good work. We had 262 projects submitted successfully. And so we will be scoring all those in the next few weeks. So you'll hear some silence from the ADOT team, but we are still here. So reach out to me via email. I'm still telecommuting, but of course I'm always available for a phone call and I can set that up really quickly if you send me an email. So I just wanted to say thanks, Genine, for letting me jump in. From here, I'll jump off, but do keep me updated if you've got questions. I hope I didn't discourage you from reaching out to me. Just know that I don't have as much freedom to help on the application process as Genine does. So thank you, Genine. I'm sorry I can't stay on longer, but good work in this region, especially this region. You guys, your coordination has been a model for the rest of the state. So I want to thank you all very much. And Genine, I will touch base with you. I'm still going to work with Sarah on the question that you had talked to me about this morning. So I'll touch base with you after we come to some better guidance for you. So I'll be reaching out to you. And I hope to talk to you all soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Lindsay. I appreciate you.
Thanks.
Just for those that might want an extra set of eyes, like Lindsay had mentioned for your grant application before you hit submit prior to the cure period closing, you would need to make sure that I have the permissions to look at your grant application, kind of like a read-only type of permission. So if I don't necessarily have that in eGrants, that would be something that you would want to make sure that you offer to me for me to be able to look at your grant application. And I know each agency has kind of their own protocols on that. So if you do not give me permission, there's no harm in that. There's no hurt feelings. I totally understand it. It's just that if you do want me to be able to look at your application through eGrants, that's the only way that I could look at it. You know, in that platform, unless you wanted to, you know, print out what you understand to be your application in the moment and send it to me, so to speak, via email, then that would be an alternative route. But if you wanted me to look at it through eGrants, that's the only way that I can, is if I actually have those permissions. So just kind of keep that in mind, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can. So feel free to reach out to me with any type of question, clarifying or otherwise. And of course, like Lindsay said, from a technical support perspective or a technical question, you can definitely reach out to ADOT prior to the cure period closing. So just share that with you. Okay, so we have like a little better than 30 minutes to kind of have an open dialogue about preparing for future grant cycles, because I promised I would tie back to that so we can have kind of a discussion about it. And I would like to start on a positive, like things that we felt really went well, whether just in general or compared to last grant cycle or previous grant cycles, so that we can acknowledge the things that we want to keep doing. And then we could slowly navigate to things that we see as being opportunities for improvement, whether it be just things that you as an organization might need some additional support around in any degree, or things that you find challenging in eGrants specifically that we could bring to the Agate help desk team, or even ADOT specifically for them to look into, or just other things that you think, you know, if we could take a different approach to it, it might be of value to agencies in our region, and that might even translate well into other regions. So just going to kind of open up the floor, and we'll just start with, like I said, kind of the positives, the things that you've seen gone well. And for those that did not apply for funding this grant cycle, if you can dig deep and remember back to the last one and still have a voice in this, you know, I still welcome your thoughts on things that we could you know, celebrate and keep doing, and then also your thoughts on things that we could do to make it easier or better in the future. So just going to kind of open up the floor. Anyone want to start with something that they observed that they'd like to see keep happening? All right, I'm going to ask a different question. So in the grant application, I know there was the opportunity for you to export what ADOT has as their vehicle inventory list, and then you could, in theory, use that to kind of compare and contrast it to your current vehicle inventory list. And then there's the table within the grant application where you actually fill in all those particulars. Let's take a look at that and tell me what you liked and where you feel like there might be an opportunity. You want to share what they liked about it? I could tell everyone's talking at the same time, which is why it's crickets right now. Anybody have some thoughts on that part of the grant application that they'd like to share?
Janine, this is Jim Campbell.
Hi, Jim.
Hi, I just wanted to mention that, when we went through our grant process, especially in that section, everything flowed very well. And it was
Okay.
very simple to navigate through it and upload the information. So we kind of zipped right through those sections fairly well. So from our standpoint, it went, and we have probably about, I don't know, 40, 50 vehicles listed on there. So it went really well.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Because I know that's a relatively new feature within eGrants. And so I think it's important for us to, get some good feedback on that, and good being like what is working well with it. And then also like, where is there an opportunity? And I know everyone has, a kind of a different tenor with it. If you're new to the whole grant application process, all of it could be a little bit more overwhelming than to someone who's more seasoned. But in the same spirit, the fleet size does matter. So to your point, that you had 40 to 50 vehicles, other agencies hearing that you had success with it, even with a fleet that large, can be reassuring to those that might have a smaller fleet. But in the same breath, if people still had challenges and they had a smaller fleet, they might be able to look to you and say, well, what did you do differently than what we did? Because for us, it wasn't that easy. And we could kind of peel back the layers on the why. So I appreciate you sharing that. Anyone else have some thoughts on a different section or the same section in?
Hey, Genine, this is John from Oro Valley.
Hey, John.
And I would agree with James. The process was pretty straightforward and worked well, and didn't have much problem with eGrants getting the information into it. Other than ADOT acknowledged this, but we had to actually load everything. It didn't copy forward like it had done in previous years. But even then, it wasn't that difficult to do. But one thing Mike Alexander and I were talking about, as we apply for the vehicles, we always apply for them. They're very generic in that application. And I always put in the narrative that we're looking for vehicles with 4 wheelchair positions instead of 2.
Right.
And also, we always work with creative bus cells and change the configuration so the lift is in the front of the vehicle and the wheelchair positions are in the front of the vehicle instead of the rear. And we always have to do that after the fact with creative bus cells, because there is no mechanism to do that in eGrants. So you just get the generic configuration and the generic 2 wheelchair position vehicle in eGrants. So it would be nice if maybe at some point in time they could maybe add those selections somehow in there to say that we would need it like this instead. So we're not always backdooring it at the end.
Okay. All right. So I wrote that down about being able to put in the configurations in advance instead of having to do it kind of on the back end separately with creative.
That they
All right.
sorry. I can see where part of the reason is that ADOT has to manage the money, and they can't just let people willy-nilly, because it does cost a little extra and the town has to pay for it instead of the eGrants paying for it.
Right.
Instead of 5310 paying for it, we have to pay an extra $2,500 per vehicle for it. So I can see partially why that isn't there, but at any rate, that's what we were talking about.
Okay. And perhaps there's a modality where you would just have to check another box saying that you understand that you might have to pay the differential, associated with this configuration, but at least it would still be able to be captured in eGrants in advance of.
Yeah, up front, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, perfect. I wrote that down. Thank you. Who else has something they like to share? And it doesn't necessarily have to be for that specific section. It can be a different section in eGrants, whether it's something that you found easy to use or something that you just struggled with for whatever reason, and doesn't necessarily mean it's a flaw within eGrants or anything like that. It just might be that particular section was challenging. So when we look to do future trainings for application training, because that always comes up, we could work with ADOT to make sure that that particular section or certain elements of that section get a little bit more airtime, so to speak, or looked at a little bit more closely. So what section or sections might have been a little bit challenging, and perhaps we'd like to see some additions made to the application training.
Genine, I wanted to give a shout out to the, this is John at Oro Valley again, to the civil rights team, because in the past, in years past, when I had to do that section, it was a lot of hard work and a lot of digging on your own to come up with things they needed and stuff. And now they have really streamlined it a lot and made it a lot easier to get your demographic data and all of the associated stuff that you have to put into the civil rights section. That they just, I thought they're doing a marvelous job with all of that. So I just
their
wanted to give them
template has made
shout
things a lot easier. That is for certain. And I feel like they were amazing. I mean, they were amazing in past years too, in terms of the level of customer service or support. But this year, I think they really stood out in terms of their level of service. They helped a lot of agencies in pretty much record time. I mean, there's always kind of a one-off, but I think across the board, for the most part, they did an amazing job. I mean, they're helping a lot of people all at the same time in a grant cycle. So, you know, my hat's off to them. It's very stressful. So yeah, I wrote that down. Thank you, John, for sharing that. And I will echo that sentiments, make sure they get acknowledgement for that. What else? What are some things that we also could celebrate, or things that you found challenging just in the overall process that we could look at supporting you more, or helping you more, so it's not as difficult or not as stressful, or even things that we could start talking about well in advance of the application cycle opening, to make it so that you have more time to prepare for those sections? Anything in that space, if there's something that you'd like to share that we can kind of champion as I mean, I know 2 years seems like it's a long ways off, but I still think it's important to kind of take note of those things so we can, when it's the right time, make sure that we carve out that time for it. Anyone want to share anything about things that they think, you know, warrant extra planning time? I mean, some of you are very seasoned in this, and maybe you have kind of your own best practice, and you say, hey, you know, for us, we start looking at X, Y, and Z if we're going to be applying for this type of project. You know, we start looking at it 6 months out, or we start running our numbers, you know, a year out. I don't know. I'm talking off the cuff here, but is there kind of a best practice, things that, you know, you think would be helpful for other people who might be newer to this to keep in mind? And then with that, we can incorporate those pieces into our future meetings. I'm kind of picking on the folks that are a little bit more seasoned to kind of shed some light on this, but
Genine, this is John at Oro Valley again.
yeah.
So you had been prodding us right from the beginning to send you our projects and what we're doing, because you have to get it in your coordinated mobility plan.
Right.
Which is very helpful for us to have to sit down and go through all that with you. But the one thing that might make it more streamlined for everyone is when you send out that initial prodding to say, hey, get this stuff ready to roll, eGrants is going to be opening up soon. If you could ask the questions that they ask in eGrants that we have to answer when we build our projects, then we would have that all ready to go for you, as well as once eGrants opens, we could pretty much copy and paste those things right into eGrants.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. That's good feedback.
Or at
All
least,
right, I wrote that down.
at least we would start to build those answers to those questions as we're getting ready to work with you.
Sure.
So
No, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. Anyone else have anything to add to that, or something different they'd like to add to the conversation? I want to make sure we just spend some time on what we could do differently moving forward, or things that are helpful. We want to make sure we keep doing while this still is really fresh on everyone's mind, because everyone just got finished for the most part. I mean, I know we're still in the cure period, but as far as the bulk of the work for the grant cycle, most people have just finished up. So it's pretty fresh in everyone's mind.
Genine, just a quick note that I found, I would read through the whole thing first, because I found this was my first time doing it, and we'd be answering questions, and I realized I was putting too much information in one section, because a question or two later, we're actually asking for the particular information there versus where it was. So that might be helpful to reduce redundancy.
Yeah, I think that's a good best practice. I mean, I think it's helpful, especially when you're new, is to kind of get a sense of the whole landscape of the grant application, what's going to be asked of you, because especially if you need to delegate some tasks out, if you know that there's a whole section dedicated to vehicle inventory while you're carving out other elements, you could have someone on your team working on the vehicle inventory pieces as well. So I think it's good to kind of know what all the grant application is going to ask of you, but to your point, to make sure that you're putting critical information in the right spots and not necessarily creating more rework for yourself because you just didn't know it was going to get asked later in the application and you'd already put it somewhere else. So that's good feedback. Thank you. Anything else anyone wants to share? Best practices that they use, or even things that they learned along the way that they found helpful and they're going to kind of make note of for the future? How about from some of the newer folks that perhaps they're new to their agency, or this is the first time they themselves or their agency have applied for funding for a particular type of project, not necessarily just 53 and 10 in general. Any takeaways, lessons learned that you think would benefit the group?
Hi, Genine. This is Jessica Winchester, COPD.
Hey, Jessica.
Hey. In the past, I had knowledge of the process. It really did help me with working with other organizations. So when we went this time, is my first time completing it with COPD, it seemed to really go smoothly. And I did really like the format, just compared to other grants that we have been completing. It did actually roll very smoothly. And I also really appreciate all of the help that you were giving us and being able to reach out to you about different areas and your availability. So it's been a very smooth process. I definitely do think there are some things that we're doing here in our organization that we'll be doing differently. So that way next time it'll be a little smoother even. But we're just trying to make those system changes now. But once we do, we'd be happy to share that.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate that, Jessica. Thank you. And thanks for the kind words. I appreciate that. That's very kind of you.
This is Mitch Eskritt from Beacon Group.
Hey, Mitch.
Yeah, I have a couple comments as well. And yeah, I'll reiterate that, Genine, you were very helpful throughout this process, and you're a great resource for, I would assume, for people who have been doing this for years, as well as myself, who this is my first year doing this with Beacon Group. Whenever we had a question, you were available and you answered right away too, which is outstanding. So I really appreciate that. As far as the application process, it's pretty simple and straightforward. There are a few time-consuming aspects of it, and Jim had mentioned earlier, entering the vehicles, and we have a large fleet, so that did take some time. But overall, kind of going through the process, it wasn't too much effort, in my opinion, and it was more just checking to make sure everything was accurate, and then double checking and triple checking.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I wrote your thoughts down so I can kind of do a recap later via email too. So thank you, and I appreciate the kind words. That's very, very nice. I'm happy to help, so I just feel like I'm just doing my job, what I'm supposed to do, but I appreciate the gratitude nonetheless. Any other comments or things people would like to share about the process, whether you're more seasoned or new? I think it's helpful to kind of get viewpoints from people at different touch points, meaning some people are newer to the grant process, some people are not as new, they're more seasoned, but also sometimes this is the first time you ever applied for a mobility management grant, and before you never applied for those before. So this is kind of like your first time ever applying for that type of a project. And so there was some lessons learned in that. And I think those kinds of conversations are helpful. The same with, there's some people that perhaps have never applied for operating funds. And there's people that have always applied for operating funds. And so I think it's good to kind of share, different thoughts around even those pieces. Like, here's some things that we find helpful when we apply for certain types of funding, or here's where I struggled with applying for a certain type of funding because we were new at it. So you can get insights or helpful tips from other agencies who have gone before you and have applied for that type of funding in the past. So if there's anything anyone would want to share, that those kinds of comments or feedback are also helpful.
Hey, Genine, this is John at Oro Valley.
Hey, John.
Hi. One thing that I've always found helpful, and especially now we're on 2-year grant cycles, is to have a full print version of the application I submitted. Because when I'm applying the next time, I can look at it and see how I worded certain things and argued certain points. And you can even copy from it and paste it into a Word document and edit it and then paste it into eGrants and stuff. And unfortunately, I just tried to do a full print version again, and the help desk was supposed to be fixing that according to Lindsay, but it still comes up as an error. So Lindsay will provide you a PDF full print version of your grant if you ask her to, which is what I'm going to do here in a few minutes, since I had to resubmit mine. So anyways, I just wanted to, if people aren't doing that, and if you weren't aware that Lindsay will give you a PDF of it if you want it, I just wanted to let people know.
Thank you. No, that's really good information. And just like you had shared about, just having the ability to kind of glean from what you found to be successful in the past, or just even save you from a lot of rework. You can copy particular elements out of your grant application into a Word document and edit or massage it as you see fit with the appropriate changes, and then copy your changes into your new grant application. I think that can save a lot of time, but also especially if you're applying for a project that ties well into a previous project, then you have some continuity as well. So I think there's lots of merit to those points that you mentioned. So thank you for sharing that. And so for those of you that either weren't aware that you could ask Lindsay at ADOT for a full print copy, or that you could even normally do it through eGrants, but right now there seems to be a little bit of an error popping up until Ag gets able to fix that. Thing that you feel would serve you well, please feel free to reach out to Lindsay and ask of that, but also just kind of make a note for future reference to try and do that if you feel like that would be of value to you. So thank you, John. Appreciate you sharing that.
You're welcome.
What else? All right, well, I am going to ask that if there are some things that you would like to share with me privately about any challenges that you had, either not like a knowledge gap or just, I wasn't really sure what they were asking in a particular grant application. And in the future, if I had more clarity on that, that would be helpful. Or, I really want to prepare well in this particular aspect of the grant application. Do you have any tips or suggestions on how to go about preparing for that well? I would ask that you feel free to email me those types of questions, comments, or concerns, so that I can support you well as an individual organization. But also, if I start to see somewhat of a trend, meaning there seems to be a theme across the board, a lot of people asking very similar questions or needing help or support around a particular area of the grant application, it allows me to then extend that kind of awareness to ADOT and say, hey, can we work together to kind of help support all the agencies, not just in the PAG region, but across the state in navigating these particular elements successfully, especially for future grant cycles. So if you can share those with me, that would serve you well, but of course, serve other agencies as well. All right, so I'm just gonna kind of wrap up a little bit early. I guess that's probably good news, right? We're gonna end the meeting a little bit early, but just a quick reminder that if you have not yet sent me your vehicle inventory list that you submitted through your grant cycle, please send that to me. Even if you did not apply for funding this cycle, I still need your vehicle inventory list to be able to include it in our coordinated plan efforts. If you are still working on any prioritization elements and you need those communicated in our coordinated plan still, make sure you get those to me. I know there's a couple folks that are navigating something rather unique, and so I understand where they're at and we're working on those pieces. But for the rest of the agencies, if I do not yet have your final version of all your projects that you submitted for funding and the associated prioritization of those, please make sure that you send those to me. And I only say that because I know sometimes between the time that you originally send it to me and then the time that you actually hit submit, sometimes people will change either the prioritization of a project, or they'll add a project or remove a project. And so if there's been any change to any aspect of your project, whether it be the title, even as simple as the title, or the priority, or you added a project, please, please, please make sure that I have those changes so that I can make sure it's in our coordinated plan. Those elements are due to ADOT today. So it's really important that I have those, because that is one of the first things ADOT will look at to see, is it reflected in our coordinated plan? And if it's not, it's pretty much a no-go with your grant application. So I want to make sure that that is not anyone's story. So please, please, please double, triple check, make sure that what you have sent me is the latest version of what you put in your grant application. And then just as a final reminder, reach out to ADOT for the printed version if you feel like that will be of service to you. But remember what Lindsay said, to make sure that the status of your grant application is not in the modifications required status, but making sure that it's been submitted status. So double, triple check and making sure that that's the status that your grant application is showing, if you are confident that you're ready to submit. And after you've hit submit, that change in status is reflected in eGrants, because the deadline for the cure period is this Friday at 4 p.m. and you do not want to be the reason why your grant application was denied, is because of something like that. So please double, triple check that and have some confidence that everything is good. And please reach out to Lindsay with any technical type of question. Again, if you want a second set of eyes on anything, feel free to reach out to me. And then if there's any questions at all that you have about anything, please reach out to me. That's what I'm here for. I even answer emails at late hours of the night and early in the morning. So don't feel like the only time you can ask me a question is, you know, somewhere in the 8 to 5 space. I've answered emails at 11 o'clock. I've answered emails at 6:30 in the morning. So feel free to reach out to me. Okay. I'm here to help you and support you in whatever way I can. So unless there's something else someone would like to add, we're going to go ahead and conclude today's meeting. And again, I'm going to send out that in-kind form. And just as a reminder, if your salary is paid for with federal dollars, please check the box that reflects that so that we don't count your hours as in-kind for the purpose of this meeting. All right. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. I appreciate all that you do in service of others throughout our region. As always, let me know how I can help, and I will talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Thank you, Genine.
Thank you.
Thanks, Janine.
Thanks,
Thank
Janine.
you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye-bye.